Well, hello there, Dippers, and welcome back to round 39 of the Knuckle Sammich podcast, the official MMA podcast of Sauce on the Side. As always, Dippers, I'm your host, Drake, joined by my guest host, the man of Knuckle Sammich. He is back in studio, and that is Mr. Thomas R. Shackelford.
Glad to be back, guys.
And Dippers, we also have our guest host here, who will probably jump in at conversation from time to time, Mr. Leighton Pip Shaventone.
Bird Box is not a good movie, Thomas.
Dippers, we have a lot on the slate today. Well, we don't have any actually fights. We will talk about UFC 235, talk about the card as it's finally coming into picture. We'll talk about some of the fights that we're excited for, which basically every single fight we will be excited for. This card is absolutely loaded. We will talk about Polyana Viana. She has probably one of the most interesting stories of the past year of MMA. We will talk about that little scenario there, and we will even talk, give you a little foreshadowing into our picks for next week, seeing that the UFC on ESPN kicks off a week from this weekend. So, Mr. Producer, you know what to do. Welcome to the Knuckle Sammich Podcast with Thomas R. Shackelford, a Sauce on the Side production. All right, Mr. Shackelford. So, actually, we're going to kick this show off a little different. You had talked about, after you listened to the last show that we had, about how you definitely feel like you need to watch Bird Box now. And, you know, Latency and I, we discussed a lot of the problems with this show, or with this movie. What did you think about it? You know, you kind of, you come on here and you talk about movies with Leighton, and you guys have differing opinions. Leighton and I didn't really like it. What did you think, Mr. Shackelford?
I didn't think it was a bad movie. It was suspenseful. It reminded me a lot of The Happening a few years ago, but just like with a little more edge on it. It was a more sharpened Happening, I felt like. Instead of... I hate to throw a little spoiler.
Oh, dude, spoilers are... You're talking to me.
Okay.
So go
They
ahead.
spoil the entire movie, so don't worry about it.
Yeah, we spoiled the whole thing.
I won't spoil Bird Box. Spoiler for The Happening. And, you know, that was another movie that just...
Death Toll is Nicole Kidman, right? Now I'm thinking of? No, that's The Mist.
Mark Wahlberg.
Mark Wahlberg. I think of The Mist.
Yeah, The Mist. This one had Mark Wahlberg.
Nothing sharper than Mark Wahlberg.
People were trashing it whenever they found the ending happened. Again, it didn't really bother me. Like, I consider myself, I watch all kinds of movies. I've got my favorite movies. I'm the type of guy that can take, like, I can watch the artsy
all of
movies.
Steven Seagal.
Yeah, all Steven Seagal movies. I got my artsy movies over here. I got my kung fu over here. I got my suspense. You know, some of them mix in. I've got my very favorites. But, you know, The Happening, when the ending happened, people just were like shit in the bed. Like, they hated it. They were okay with it the whole time, but I think there's a thing with people. They want a conclusion. They want an ending. They want... This is why. And when the ending was what it was, which I won't... If you haven't seen The Happening, it was the plants killing people. Basically, the earth was killing off humans, which is probably going to happen, you know. 50 years from now, we'll look at it and be like, I saw The Happening and enjoyed the ending, so I know how to get out of this.
Yes. When the earth fights back.
Yeah. So, and I kind of felt like this was a more fine-tuned Happening. You know... I didn't have any problem. I thought it was a fun movie.
My take on it was I was completely satisfied with the movie. Like, at the very beginning, the first hour of the movie, I paid for my whole seat, but I was only using the edge. I mean, I was all in on this movie until about 5 minutes after the birthing scene. Like, an hour into this movie, I'm locked in, I'm dialed in, and then it just started getting really, really weird to me.
What was weird about it, though? Because for me... I thought that made it more interesting because that's when it kind of ramped up. The stakes are higher to me after that.
I don't know. I guess I just didn't really care about the stakes in a way. Like, I enjoyed the mass chaos more so than the one confined story on Sandra Bullock, who I'm not that big of a fan of, and these two kids who you don't really know. You just know that, okay, Sandra Bullock, Sandra Bullock has these two children, and she has to protect them. And they're not really her kids till the end.
You didn't know they were her
No,
kids?
you knew that, but she didn't accept them as her own kids. And that was like an underlying story of the whole thing was, the first time she referred to them as her children, they're in the forest, and she screamed to the wind, take my children. That scene was so you could know, like, okay, she has matured, and she loves these two things. But I didn't care about the confined story. I like the large mass chaos, and I wish I got 2 hours of that instead of just hour and a half of Sandra Bullock doing her thing.
I don't think that ruins it in any way. I mean, that was before I saw it, I had seen some people talking about, like, oh, it's a thing for mental health and it's about suicide. It didn't feel that deep to me.
No, it did not feel deep.
It was a suspenseful it was a suspenseful type movie that had a little bit of that.
Mine and Leighton's biggest problems, though, was that Leighton, he said, the problem he had with it was whenever somebody sees whatever they see, nobody else can see it, right? But whenever you could hear things, like all of them could hear it at the end, which was really bizarre to me, and I didn't think about it like that in depth whenever I watched it. But then once Leighton brought that up to me, I'm like, what the hell? That doesn't make any sense. And then also another thing that doesn't make any sense is if it's that powerful, how in the hell can it not come in?
It's
They try to make the wind into not just an entity, and it just didn't work for me. I wasn't digging it. I didn't buy the whole you get inside, you're safe.
It does get a little bit different. They do switch it up a little, whereas when they're driving or when she first sees the girl in the hospital, it's visual. Well, then at some point, the voices, it also becomes auditory. So that was a little bit of a variation. The shit I thought was really cool was the mental health patients that they saw them, but they didn't care, and it still had an effect on them. But it almost turned them. It was almost like they couldn't get into the houses themselves, so those people that didn't care, that they used them to get in the houses for them, And actually, this will transition. Oh, before I do the transition into the actual MMA, because there is a transition, I promise you. I will say if I was doing a latency 3 dip system, I'd do like 1.5. Like, I liked the movie. I'll probably watch it again. I'll probably watch it again. What'd you give it?
I get 1.6.
Is that bad? Is an average score bad?
2 is I'll most likely watch it again. 1.6 is like if somebody hasn't seen it, like if you haven't watched it, I'd watch it with you.
Okay.
But I'm not good by myself ever.
Yeah, it was a cool movie. It like I said, I like those a little bit. I like The Happening. If you didn't like The Happening at all, like if you were one of those people that just bitched wanting your $10 back at the time because that was like 2005, maybe not see this movie, But if you were cool with The Happening, this is a little grittier version. So
two of the biggest problems I had with it actually came during the birthing scene. The one was, John Malkovich, whenever he's standing outside in the garage.
Oh, I loved him in this.
I love John Malkovich. He was my favorite. He was one of my favorite characters. And whenever he's looking at that guy, he never, you're standing in front of a window. You can't punch the glass door in and walk on inside. Like the guy was waving a shotgun around in everybody else's face. Like he was legitimately crazy. Yeah. But yet we didn't see what happened with him. All he did was open up the thing. Like, did he just turn around and look? Or could he just turn around and kick the door in, which the door opens inside. So he could have kicked the door and bam, he's safe. And then... Oh,
you mean Malkovich? He could have punched that window in, but it kind of goes against his character. Like, his character is... His
character was waving a shotgun around everybody's face.
But
that kind of crazy
he
guy.
Wasn't going to use it. He's a thought guy. You got to look at it like this. Here's how I watch movies. And our buddy Chucky and even Leighton almost failed me this past week on another movie I recommended to him. you got to go into movies with the intent of not what you would do. So we know Drake's a badass. He gonna punch the window out and go trash the dude that is a pretty weak dude, and he's like wrestling an old lady. Like that dude's a wussy. You gotta look at it at how the characters are. You know what I mean? The black dude, I forget his name. He is a military guy.
Tom.
He immediately assesses the situation, gets the birds out of the freezer, grabs the shotgun, and then he gets conked on the head. Well, then you got a guy like
and he was out for 5 minutes. We ever seen a guy get knocked out for 5 minutes? I mean, I've seen guys stand up from a Mark Hunt punch faster than that.
You know, you got to go into movies. I had this argument with one of our buddies. He'll go see a comic book movie and be pissed because it wasn't realistic, or be pissed because they didn't follow the storyline. It makes no sense to me. There's a million comic books out there. There's 4,000 storylines for Batman, so there's no reason to think that they can't make up their own. You know, just go into a movie with no expectation and don't be looking at it like, you know, well, I'd kick that window in and whoop that dude's ass. Like, we probably would, you know, but not the 65-year-old lawyer that as soon as gay neighbors because they're building a freaking glass house. Like, that dude doesn't punch in windows. You know what that dude does? He sits in there until somebody of action comes down and says, hey, get me the hell out of here. That guy's crazy.
Yeah, I don't know. There was a lot of problems I had with it. It's just I don't know.
But did you have fun watching?
I had a blast.
Okay, that's all that matters.
Until they got on the river.
So, like you said, about an hour.
Yeah.
It was 50% good for you.
Yeah, no, Tom was probably the toughest guy in the movie. That was a good one. Tom, he was a great character. And my second favorite, like, Malkovich, he stands alone in, like, that weird category. It's like, he's pretty close to how I would have treated most situations. Like, hey, guys, we shouldn't be letting people into our house. The bad stuff's outside, and if we stay inside, we're good, and we don't let anybody in. I don't know. I would, and I thought what was also really bizarre is that the actual crazy guy that was in the house took a long time until he actually snapped to being crazy.
Yeah, and I wonder if I don't know. That was a little weird too, because at first I just thought he was biding his time, but then he had the eye thing going on, which made me think that the guys outside were still having some control over him. You remember?
Right.
So yeah, there's a little bit of holes you could punch through if you wanted to, but overall, if you just watch the movie, it was a pretty fun time.
Yeah, I mean, it was definitely a good time. You will at least enjoy the first hour of it, so I think it's definitely worth the watch.
To segment that into MMA, did you notice that there was a very popular former MMA fighter in that movie?
Huh?
Yes,
Are you
sir.
serious? Who was it?
None other than the Dean of Mean, Keith Jardine.
Keith Jardine?
Yep.
I didn't even realize that.
He was one of the crazy people
Of course
at
he
the
was.
very end. He was the one that Tom comes out and he's like, can I help you? And I think Jardine says, no, you can't help me, but we can help you. And then he promptly gets shot with a shotgun.
That was the Dean of Mean?
The Dean of Mean lasts about 1 minute in the movie.
When did Keith Jardine get into movies?
He still lives down in Albuquerque. He still helps train fighters, but he actually runs like a super high class coffee shop, which I would love to go to. I think he's got his own roast. They roast their own beans. They do all kinds of crazy stuff. And he's made a bunch of money, or not a bunch. I don't know how much money he's made, but he's as far as stuntmen and Hollywood tough guys go, he's one of them. There's another dude that used to fight named Tate Fletcher. He was on a season of The Ultimate Fighter. He does pretty well. There's probably a couple dozen of those. Jay Huron. They're just in they have a ton of movie credits. They're only in there for a minute, 30 seconds, but they apparently make a pretty decent living. Just sometimes they do a little choreography. Sometimes they're just a bald guy with a giant beard that gets shot in 30 seconds.
Dude, I did not know that was Keith Jardine. Yeah. I'm disappointed in myself, dude, because Keith Jardine was one of my favorite fighters.
You'll have to watch it over again.
Yeah, I'll have to watch it again.
You got to go back to the well. It's an automatic, too.
Dude, and you know what's weird is whenever I watched it, I once you say who he was, I knew exactly what you were talking about. Once you said Keith Jardine, I'm like, oh shit, that was him, because it didn't ring a bell, but I knew it was it was somebody I'd seen before. And dude, how much better would that movie have been if Tom would have just fought him and it would have been Keith Jardine in his old school fight stance where then I would have known it was Keith Jardine once he got into that odd little awkward stance. So we'll go ahead and talk about some of the headlines in MMA just over this week. We don't really have any fights that we can necessarily break down. We did get our wish, though. We'll talk about that in a minute. Polyana Viana actually fights off a robber and absolutely destroys him. Did you see the pictures of the guy's face?
He looked pretty beat up.
He got his ass whooped.
It was pretty demoralizing. There was another picture of her sitting next to him, and he's just like sitting there. I guess he tried to rob her. She kicked the shit out of him, and she just told him, "Hey, we're gonna sit here and wait for the cops." So,
and somebody came up and took a picture of those two together?
Yeah, I think that it was like outside her jiu-jitsu academy or something. So I'm sure there were other people around witnessing. There's probably videos at some point.
You know, of all places to go rob somebody, why would you go sit outside of a jiu-jitsu academy and wait and try to rob a woman?
You know, you would think that would be the last place. Do you think there's any money in a jiu-jitsu academy?
Not much.
No, but this is Brazil we're talking, and I don't know if you know much about Brazil, but it's a pretty shifty area. Nobody's really. Vitor Belfort's sister got he's still hoping she's alive, but like 20 years ago she got abducted just because she was Vitor Belfort's sister. Like that's what they do around there. So
that is unbelievable.
When you got people that you've got some people with some money, and then you got people as poor gets. You do what you can to survive, and I guess that dude thought walking in a jiu-jitsu academy to steal money was a good idea.
Yeah, that was not well thought out. Dumbest robber in the world goes to him.
He's definitely up there.
Yeah, I think he gets the cake for that.
He gets beat up by a 115-pound woman, and he looked like he fought Mike Tyson.
Yeah, I think he goes right up there with the videos of like people that run up and try to kick a door in and break their leg, or like they kick one of the doors in that's glass and like the glass shatters. They run in, do their job, then they run out the other door and hit the door and get knocked out. Like this guy jumps right into that category. So we'll talk a little bit about the fight card that's coming up this next weekend. TJ Dillashaw and Henry Cejudo, they will be fighting for the 125-pound belt, which basically makes no sense to me because they are going to be basically getting rid of this weight class just so TJ Dillashaw can get that belt potentially. But we saw pictures of TJ. We'll save our picks for next week. Pictures of TJ right before his weight cut is going to start. Shackelford, what were your thoughts on those pictures, and were you pleased with how he looked?
He looked bad. There's pictures. There's a video that he put out of himself talking about, like, I don't know if the company sponsors him, but it's like a blood work company where they send you some boxes, you send in some strips with blood on it, and they do some samples. He's been getting real scientific with this stuff. He looked bad. I mean, you can look up pictures of him. I couldn't tell you what body fat percentage he is. It's low. If it's above 4, I'd be surprised. And he said he was still a little over 2 weeks away from his cut, quote unquote cut. So he's probably still, he's probably sitting 10, 15 pounds still above what he has to cut. He didn't look good. His eyes were dark. They were sunk in. He looked like he had lumps all over his head, like he'd been, I don't know. I don't know how his training is. He did not look good to me. And if he looks, I don't know who to pick in that yet, but if I see more videos of him looking any worse,
it's only going to get worse.
It'll have to be Cejudo. It'll be Cejudo just because I don't think TJ will be healthy to go 5. I don't know if he'll be healthy to take a punch.
Yeah, no, I did see the picture that I saw 2 pictures. There was like a picture of him whenever he weighs in at 135, and then the picture I saw now, he looks worse now than what he does whenever he's on the scale for 35. Yeah. So I do agree with you there, and that'll be really interesting to watch over the next week to see if he actually does make the weight. Because if he does, that might be the only gold medal he's going to get for the night.
Yeah.
So we'll talk about UFC 235, March 2nd. Maybe the best card I've ever seen I'm going to go ahead and say that. Do you agree?
It's way, 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 way up there. A couple of the names maybe people won't recognize right off the bat, but they're fighting the stars of their division. They're up and comers fighting the stars of their division. So this will be the night that you will know the name afterwards.
Absolutely.
You know, if things go their way.
Yeah, the way that we always talk about it, you know, and those fights are really like you give the guy a name so he might be able to jump right into a legitimate contender slot. And starting at the top, Bones Jones and Anthony Smith. You know, you and I, we've been on this big train for Anthony Smith even before his last fight. We said how, you know, if John Jones able to come back, you know, stay off of everything, be clean. Anthony Smith would be able to give him his toughest test. Are you surprised that they went ahead and just threw him in here like this?
You know, I'm not. I told you, I think they're trying to keep Jones busy. Or I didn't. I told you that they should keep Jones busy. And I heard Dana White saying a few things. Basically, he's been around some screw-ups, I guarantee it. He's a degenerate gambler. He says it himself. So he knows the type of personality John Jones is. So now, you know, it's in March. He's probably right back into training camp, really. So keeping him out of trouble, as long as he's passing those tests, he'll be fine. And as far as the pick, like I said, I wouldn't have been mad at him if they picked Corey Anderson, but Anderson's getting ready to have a baby, so that maybe pushed it back just a little bit. Plus, I don't know if you noticed, like the last UFC on Fox, they had Smith as kind of one of the analysts there, so they're putting him out there, and he's had a couple big wins, so it's going to be a fun fight. Again, we'll break it down later, but my gut instincts just say if it stays standing, Smith has a distinct advantage, but I don't know how good his takedown defense is. I don't know if he's good enough to hold Jones off of him as far as takedowns go.
Right. I think that'll be a very interesting fight, more or less like a chess match. I'm really looking forward to that fight, though, because I think that Smith does have a chance, but I'm excited that they booked this fight so soon because, like we said, every 3 months John Jones needs to be fighting in order to stay in the game. This one's kind of a surprising fight that they have set up. Tyrone Woodley, he will be fighting Kamaru Usman. They kind of looked over Colby Covington and his papier-mâché belt. What do you think about them picking Usman over Covington for this fight?
I honest to God don't know what's going on. I mean, you freaking Dana White took Covington to the White House to meet freaking Donald Trump with that belt. So something had to have happened. Something had to have happened to make them go Usman. Because, yeah, Usman won several fights last year, but it ain't like he blew him out of the water.
No.
They were pretty boring-ass fights. He was favored in every one of them, and he had boring fights. You know what my gut instinct is? That they think Usman has a better shot of beating Woodley, and they just want to get Woodley out of there.
Yeah.
Because at this point, you got Woodley who's nitpicking fights. Every guy they bring to him, he's like, well, I don't want to fight this guy, this guy, this guy. He's taken fights, and he fought several times. He fought in September, but it's just, I'm kind of with Dana White on this. Woodley, the only thing keeping him from being a really popular champion is kind of himself, you know. Usman kept calling him out, and you know, basically Woodley's using like racial slurs, saying like, hey, you're just their pet, you know, they're treating us the same. Like, nobody took it there but him, and that turns people off. He just turns people off. I don't know why he doesn't realize that, but he has not been he's been like the least popular champion. Covington, I don't think, would be able to beat him. And also, Covington had the thing where he had the elective nose surgery. And so, him and Woodley are both back and forth. Well, I said yes to this date. Well, I said yes to this date. Well, why didn't you guys fight? Nobody knows. They all said yes to all these dates, but none of them have fought. So, you know what? Usman's there. He's ready to fight, so throw him in there.
Yeah, no, I agree with you there. And I do agree that Woodley, they're just basically looking for his exit. Like, they need it sooner than later because I feel like there's two types of fighters. You have Basically, like the Conor McGregor, the Nate Diaz, the guys that just want the big fight, and they can pick and choose because they're looking for that big fight. Where Woodley, once you become the champion at that weight class, you kind of have to fight whoever they say you need to fight. Because if you're going to play the game of the title, if you're going to play the title game, you have to fight whoever they think is next. Like, you can't pick and choose and say, oh, you get a title shot or you don't get a title shot. You don't get to control the whole weight class. You have to fight whoever they think is next. Otherwise, the titles don't mean anything. And then we're back to, okay, now we're just doing the big money fights. Yeah. So there's 2 games you have to play, and he's on the bad side.
Woodley's doesn't sell that many pay-per-views. He's one of the lowest ones, I believe. And when you look at that weight class, there's not a lot of guys that garner like a bunch of attention. I mean, Usman's probably the next best guy in the weight class, and a lot of people probably don't know who he is.
No.
And Covington, unfortunately, people know him as this fake shtick dude, which makes it extremely easy not to care that he got blatantly passed over. He's sitting there whining. Oh, he went on a couple of the shows. He's like, Dana White's a scumbag and doesn't have any morals, and he's a liar and he's a cheat. And people are just like, whatever. Like, we'll see you later, dude.
Yeah, because he really doesn't garner any obvious recognition.
It's all negative.
Yes.
It's all negative.
Yes, and if you look at similar situations that we've seen where they've handed out like more than one belt, if DC and Jones were both able to fight and they passed over one of them for the actual title fight, everybody would be in uproar.
Oh yes.
And nobody cares about this because Colby Covington is just kind of a joke, and then you have Tyron Woodley who's picking fights, so nobody really cares. Oh. And I feel like that weight class is just. I think it should have been more apt to go than the 125 weight class.
Yeah. At this point, it's definitely one of the weirder weight classes for sure.
Yeah. So going down this card, we have actually a ton of big names. We have Robbie Lawler, Ben Askren, that got added to the card. Ben Askren obviously will be making his UFC debut. Cody Garbrandt, he got named to the card. Joe Stevenson, OSP. Mickey Gall is
Jeremy Stevens.
Jeremy Stevens, my bad.
He's fighting Zabit.
Yeah, Zabit. So, that'll be a freaking fun fight. Yeah. Joe Stevenson. No, I was way off on
Big
that.
Daddy Joe Stevenson. He's been retired like 10 years.
Holly Holm, Jorge Masvidal, Neil Magny. I mean, this thing is loaded. And like I said, the 9th fight down, you have Mickey Gall on there fighting Diego Sanchez. So that's just how loaded this card is. As far as fights that aren't, the main event, co-main event, which fights are you most tuned into? Obviously, I think we're both going to say Ben Askren there.
Well, I would consider that as a big one. I mean, no, it's not the main event, but out of all those on there, I would say the Askren Lawler is probably the one people most want to see. I wouldn't call it under the radar. As far as under the radar, I would have to go with Zabit and Stevens, and then also all the way down, very first fight of the night, Tisha Torres versus that Weili Zhang. That Zhang girl's tough as hell. Unless I'm confusing her. I think she might be an undefeated fighter out of Japan. I might be confusing her, but if it's the girl I'm thinking of, that Tisha Torres Weili Zhang fight is going to be fun. But under the radar fight, Jeremy Stevens, Zabit, fight I'm most looking forward to, Lawler Askren.
Yeah, I think I agree with you there. That Lawler Askren fight, I think it's going to tell a lot there. So any other odd stories that you've seen over the last week that you want to discuss before we wrap this quick show up?
No, I haven't seen. One thing that did strike me was Mike Tyson put out a Twitter picture of him with his baby tiger. You remember he famously raised a baby tiger, and he's just holding this little thing, and he says, and you can't read it in any way but Mike Tyson's words, and he says, not everybody can say they raised the tiger. And when I read it, I just thought, that's Mike Tyson.
That is Mike Tyson.
That's perfect.
That's awesome. Anything else?
No, sir. Can't wait to get back next week, pick some fights.
Absolutely. And on that note, for Drake, for Leighton C., and Mr. Thomas R. Shackelford, as always, Dippers, stay saucy.